Divorce lawyers of Reddit? What is the most unhinged way a spouse has tried to screw the other? I am an intellectual property attorney. I heard a story from an acquaintance. Basically, an extremely wealthy couple was getting a divorce, and it was getting nasty. They had multiple millions of dollars worth of property to divide, and it was very contentious. Eventually, the husband got pissed. He offered the wife everything if he could have her beloved pet goat. Eventually, she acquiesced and got all the property except the goat. He still had his lucrative job, so he would be fine. He made a video of himself offing the goat, barbecuing and eating, then sent it to her. I don't know how true the story is, but it's the best one I have heard. Story 2. Once my friend had a boss whose ex-wife was legally entitled to take certain belongings from their house. He had to leave for 6 hours while she came by to collect everything. When he returned, every knob and handle in the house was gone. Doorknobs, cabinet handles, drawer pulls, anything that was screwed into something and used to open it, she had taken it all. For the next week, at random moments, he would suddenly yell, "She took the friggin' knobs." Story 3. I was a divorce paralegal for 15 years. The worst opposing party we ever had represented himself. He cheated and left his wife, then filed for custody of the dog. After 2 hearings focused solely on the dog, the judge ordered them to share it, alternating 1 week at a time. On his first week of visitation, he collected the dog and immediately had it put to sleep. The following week, he gave his ex-wife a canister containing the dog's ashes. She was understandably devastated. The judge was not happy, sanctioned him, and ended up awarding literally everything to the wife in the final judgment. This guy was completely unhinged. He even tried to claim the condiments in the fridge, ketchup, mustard, and mayo, as property. He also claimed his wife's toys should be awarded to him. Really classy. Story 4. Paralegal for a divorce lawyer. This one is morbid. We represented a guy who vehemently believed that his wife was assaulting the children. The authorities were involved and child services was involved. It was never clear what the truth was, or if anything at all was happening, but our client was certain. He offed his wife during a custody exchange in front of the children. He then sat down and waited for the authorities. We visited him in jail with his criminal defense attorney as we were leaving. He told me, "Well, I guess the divorce is over now." Then he laughed. It was the first time I had ever been speechless. Edit, this has gotten a lot of responses. I cannot really reveal any additional details or context here. However, I can safely say that defending this action as heroic or understandable is an incorrect takeaway. There are no heroes here. The trauma this man put the children through was incredibly selfish, regardless of his intentions. There were so many other options that could have been explored, and many of them were already being explored when this happened. He abruptly put an end to all of them, making the truth impossible to determine. Edit 2. Where are they now? The children are in the custody of a family member. They are safe and well, although they will no doubt need extensive therapy as they get older. The man is in jail. I am unsure of his final sentence. However, I doubt he will ever be released. Edit 3. What did the kids say? Forensic interviews are highly confidential, and in this case, there was never a chance for the matter to go to a hearing. However, after multiple interviews with both children and both parents, neither the police, child services, the guardian ad litem, nor the child advocate recommended that the mother lose custody or visitation, nor did they require her visitation to be supervised. All of these matters were still ongoing when the mother died. Story 5. I represented a guy who was on his second marriage. His first wife had passed away from cancer, and he and his kids were obviously devastated. My client was a pretty sensitive guy with a big heart. His second wife could be very charming, which was why he fell for her, but it was all a facade. To make a long story about a lengthy divorce short, my client met a very kind and affectionate woman during his case. They really hit it off and were basically engaged, even though his divorce was far from over. The fiancé started having health problems and was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. Somehow, the second wife found out about this and tried to use the cancer diagnosis against my client in court. She developed this crazy theory that my client had offed his first wife by giving her cancer and that he was doing the same thing to his fiancée. The second wife's attorney, who was quite good, refused to be a party to it. The attorney never addressed the argument in court and did not even ask the second wife any questions about it during her testimony. Instead, the attorney informed the judge that the second wife wished to address the court directly about an issue. The judge allowed her to do so in a highly irregular move. The second wife told the judge her conspiracy theory, adding that she was certain my client had tried to give her cancer at some point as well. I wish I had an artist's rendering of the scene capturing the second wife's crazy eyes, her attorney's look of shame and embarrassment, the judge's look of confusion and ennui, and my look of awe-inspired disgust. Story 6. I had a client whose wife wanted him out of the house. I told him not to leave and to just move to a different bedroom for the time being because, once he was out, the chances of him ever getting back in were slim. He texted his wife and told her he was staying in the house. She called back and left a voicemail saying that she wanted him out, and that if he was not out soon, she would start taking out her unhappiness on the children and would remind them that mommy was mean to them because daddy would not leave. Story 7. I work for a divorce attorney now, but the craziest thing came to my attention when I worked for the prosecuting attorney. This couple broke up and Mr. left the house. Mrs. went to work the next morning as usual. When she returned home that evening, she found that Mr. had been to the house and removed his clothing and belongings as she expected. What she did not expect was that he had also gorilla glued her belongings together. He glued the TV remote to the table, the phone to its cradle, the couch pillows to the couch, and even glued the vacuum cleaner to the carpet. She called the police and reported it as property damage. The police went through the house with her, documenting dozens of items glued to various things. For days afterward, she kept discovering random items and would call to amend or update her report. My God, the oven mitts were glued to the wall, or he glued the effing sheets together in the linen closet. I've seen people do and say awful things to each other, but that was diabolical. Story 8. This one hit close to home because it happened between my parents. We had a family friend who was a lawyer, and my parents agreed that he would represent them both as a mediator. As the assets were being divided, my dad got absolutely slammed. She was going to get the house, the cars, half of his retirement, and an insane amount of alimony, to the tune of about $2,500 a month for the rest of her life. My dad has a good job as a municipal employee, but that was probably 70% of his paycheck. It turned out that my mom and the family friend had conspired to rip my dad off and make it seem like that was what a divorce settlement looked like. She was going to kick back more money under the table after the dust had settled. My dad just did not know how these things worked. After some convincing, he finally went out and got his own lawyer. He got a very fair divorce settlement after that. My mom still to this day cannot understand why we do not talk to her much. Story 9. How about a wholesome, insane one? I'm not a lawyer, but my mom told me this story about the divorce she got from my dad. They could not settle on an alimony amount. My mom and her lawyer came in with one number, and my dad countered with another. They could not agree because my dad thought my mom should get twice the amount of alimony she was asking for, while my mom did not want my dad to give her that much money each month. It took months for them to settle on a figure that satisfied them both. Even then, my mom set aside the extra above what she wanted in case my dad ever had a financial emergency, and my dad set aside the extra she did not want in case my mom ever had a financial emergency. The funny thing is, they do not know that the other is putting the money aside for them. My mom told me about her emergency stash, and my dad told my brother about his. My brother and I talked about it while discussing what nut jobs our parents are. Edit. I'm not going to say their divorce was perfect, because it was not. There were still hurt feelings and resentment from everyone involved. However, despite all of their flaws, both of my parents accepted responsibility for the marriage falling apart. I think it helped that they still loved each other deeply, they just were not in love anymore. They had been friends since my mom was 2 and my dad was 3, started dating when my mom was 12 and my dad was 13, and separated when they were 49 and 50. It makes sense that they grew apart. I've had a few people ask why they divorced in the first place. My dad had had a girlfriend for at least 15 years, possibly longer. My mom knew, but they agreed not to divorce until my younger brother had graduated from high school. My dad remarried his girlfriend, and my mom has also since remarried. All 4 of them get along famously now. The separation and divorce happened about 10 years ago. I'm very lucky to have 4 parents who care about me and absolutely adore my own little dudes. Story 10. I worked at an airport. A big, burly guy brought an ugly dog in a crate to the counter. He was clearly misty-eyed. It turned out his wife got the dog in the divorce, and he had to send it to her. She had told him that as soon as she got the dog, she was going to have it put down. He asked if he could have some time with the dog before the flight. So they went out onto the grass. The 2 of them rolled around together, the dog's tail wagging away, not knowing anything about his future. The guy put him back in the crate, dropped him off at the counter, said thanks, and then just walked away with his head down, looking absolutely crushed. That was 30 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. Story 11. Divorce lawyer here. The spouse had been out of the house for weeks. She waited until he was away on a business trip, went into the house, turned on all the faucets, plugged the drains, turned off the furnace, and left. It was minus 10 degrees. He came back 5 days later. The house was ruined. The water had frozen and cracked the foundation. Story 12. A friend was going through a divorce from her insane husband. He had been texting her pictures of the gun he bought and threatening her. The police were called, but there was nothing they could do because it was only a picture. He was staying with a secret girlfriend at that point. She allowed him to go to the house to get his belongings, but she was afraid to go back alone, so I went with her. The first red flag was that he had changed the locks. We waited for a locksmith to open the house and change the locks again. When the door opened, we noticed all the furniture was gone. We carefully went upstairs to look for her cats. The entire second floor was empty. No cats. No furniture. Even her clothes were gone. We later found out that he had hired a moving company to pack up and take everything, even the food in the refrigerator. We finally found the cats. He had taken them to another veterinarian in town and boarded them under his sister's name, thinking she would not be able to find them. He was eventually forced to disclose what had happened to her possessions. He had them taken to a storage unit far away from home. Story 13. I was an assistant at a family law practice, not a lawyer. The divorce was already a disaster because the ex-husband was a jerk. But it got so much worse when the wife started dating someone new with a severe cat allergy about a year after they split up. Her psycho ex bought a cat during his parenting time with the kids, even though he was not allowed to have pets at his apartment. He sent the kids back to their mom's house with the cat and all of its belongings. The mom was furious because she had never wanted a cat in the first place, and her boyfriend was severely allergic. She called us asking what to do because her kids were bawling, saying she could not get rid of their new sibling, and she had the cat in the garage. The ex had told the kids if mommy loves you, she'll let you keep the cat since daddy is not allowed to have cats at his house. Story 14. Not my divorce, but my divorce lawyer told me about a case she was involved in where both clients were so petty that everyone met to argue over literally every single scrap of everything. The final object that neither of them would settle on was a ceramic rabbit statue, a generic one from Home Depot or somewhere similar. It had zero sentimental value, but because it was the last item left, neither side wanted to lose the final thing. They dragged the dispute out over 3 separate meetings for that one item. I do not remember who ended up getting it, but once they settled everything and signed the paperwork, the winning party placed it on their lawyer's desk as a gift and walked out. Story 15, she accused her ex-husband of essaying their children while they were under the watchful eye of nationally endorsed social workers who supervised his contact with them, which was only required because he did not have his own private accommodation at the time. She also claimed that his Indian flatmates were inherently dirty. After the obviously false essay allegation, I warned her about the consequences of being caught lying about something like that, including the permanent loss of custody. She fired me but kept calling back under fake names, trying to obtain free advice that contradicted what I had told her. Everyone who answered the calls recognized her immediately. This was a long time ago, and I now specialize in insurance litigation, which is far less ugly. Story 16. I worked at a computer repair store as a sales technician. A guy came in with a desktop computer that he wanted Windows reinstalled on. I asked if he wanted me to back up all of his data first, and he told me he had already saved everything he wanted and to just wipe it. I put it in the queue, he paid, and left. I started working on it about an hour later since an XP installation only took about 45 minutes off the network. I did not bother doing anything else besides deleting the original partition, creating a new one, and installing Windows. About an hour later, his wife came running and asking if we had a computer with Smith as the last name. I told her we did, and she showed me her ID. She said that her husband had brought it in to destroy all the evidence of him cheating and stealing money from their business. When she asked if I had wiped everything, I told her I had only reinstalled Windows and had not actually wiped the data. I called her husband and explained the situation. I told him his wife was there to pick up the computer. He asked if I had reinstalled Windows like we had discussed, and I told him I had. He replied, "I don't give her crap, give her the computer. There isn't anything left on it anyway." I said, "All right," and hung up. I told her that he had given permission for me to release the computer to her. Then I explained that reinstalling Windows does not magically delete everything and told her I could recover all of the files in a couple of hours. I ended up staying late that night. She bought me pizza and Mountain Dew. I recovered every file he had tried to have me destroy and made multiple copies for her. She ended up calling him from the store and reading aloud some of the emails he had tried to delete. I was worried he might come back and confront me, but nothing ever came of it. Story 17. I did not handle the divorce. I handled parts of the aftermath. During the divorce, she disappeared, was living in a truck somewhere, and simply could not handle it mentally. He gave her 5 of his 9 companies. They were the ones that owed 7 figures in payroll taxes. On paper, he had made her the bookkeeper. She spent decades trying to escape the IRS over the consequences. Story 18. Not my case, but during my first year of law school, lawyers from different practice areas came to give us a peek behind the curtain of their professions. The divorce lawyer told the story of a well-to-do couple who spent months and tens of thousands of dollars fighting over absolutely everything, all the way down to a single ceramic ashtray. He could not remember its significance, but somehow it had come through the husband's family. Even after everything else had been decided, they spent many more months and nearly $100,000 fighting over that one ashtray. Then, after a court hearing, the wife finally won the ashtray. She promptly walked out onto the white courthouse steps and smashed the ceramic ashtray, leaving the pieces scattered for the husband to see on his way out. I decided that day I would not become a divorce lawyer. Story 19. Not a divorce lawyer, but my grandmother had an affair with her divorce lawyer before serving her husband with divorce papers. She became pregnant and convinced her husband that the child was his. He paid child support for 18 years and never had a clue. It was pretty awful, especially since the lawyer had a family of his own. They have no idea that my mom or our family exists. Story 20. I have a friend who went through a nasty divorce. His ex was extremely vengeful. Even though he had done nothing wrong, such as cheating or lying, he had been laid off from a good job, and the loss of status embarrassed her, especially because he became a stay-at-home dad and their kids adored him. This was despite the fact that she had an MBA and a 6-figure job herself. She would buy expensive items with credit cards to show high expenses, then return them for cash or store credit so the refund would not go back onto the card, trying to claim more support to get back to work. He took a job at Home Depot even though he had been an engineer at a tech company. Later, he landed a part-time IT consulting role that paid about the same as his full-time job at Home Depot. She petitioned the court to force him into a full-time job, essentially trying to make him work 30 more hours for the same income. As part of his custody arrangement, he was granted dinner with the kids one night a week from 5 to 7 p.m. He asked to change it to picking the kids up from school until 7 p.m., but she refused, even though the kids were at home with a nanny from 3 to 5 p.m. while she was at work. Story 21, former divorce lawyer here. Not so much insane, but unfortunately common. Accusing a former spouse of essaying the children or committing domestic violence in order to retain full custody and obtain a restraining order that forces the spouse out of the marital home. This establishes the new status quo for custody, which judges are often reluctant to disrupt later on. It takes months, if not years, for the accused spouse to prove their innocence, and CPS will often find evidence where none exists if the accusing party is a skilled enough manipulator or actor. The long-term outcome is pretty horrendous for everyone involved. Children are brainwashed against the estranged parent while they are young. Later, they often grow to resent the accusing parent for poisoning their relationship with the estranged parent. The children frequently grow up with a multitude of mental health issues. It is probably one of the worst things a person can do to their children, all to win against a former spouse. Story 22. Not a lawyer, just someone who grew up with a terrible family situation. My mom was an evil mastermind when it came to the divorce. My parents had been separated but were still living in the same house. Around the time of year when our family would normally go on a camping trip, I believe for Canada Day, she convinced my dad that they should split the vacation. He would take us for 1 week, and when he returned, she would take the 3 of us kids for the following week. While my dad had us on his week, she secretly had her friends help clear out the entire house. I literally mean everything. There was nothing left, not a single clothes hanger, no couches, no TVs, absolutely nothing. She planned the vacation carefully too. Since we were camping, we did not need money or have access to cell service, and she took full advantage of that. She emptied the bank accounts and hid all the money. She did not stop there. She also maxed out the lines of credit and every credit card. Normally, that would have raised red flags, but she had planned ahead. Earlier, she had convinced my dad to quit his high-paying job to start a company. The business was still new and required a lot of expenses, so the banks did not think twice about the unusually large transfers because they fit the company's normal spending pattern. When it was time for my dad's trip to end, she told him to call her once he was back in cell range. When he did, she said she was already heading out in the same direction and suggested we meet halfway to save the kids some driving time on the way to the next trip. It seemed strange because after a week of camping, we all wanted to shower and clean up, but she was very insistent. We met halfway and switched vehicles. My dad drove home alone while we were taken to a different location than the one she had told him about. When he got home, he thought the house had been robbed. It did not sink in at first. He called the police and started calling family members because the house was so completely empty. He broke down and did not know what to do. That was when my mom's dad came over and told him the truth. He said she had left him and taken everything. She hid us, and I believe they also tried to keep us away from him, but that part is a bit fuzzy for me. Eventually, it all caught up with my mom. The judge was shocked by what she had done. She even tried to convince us kids that my dad was abusive and had a police officer question us in an attempt to get us to lie about him. The whole situation was unbelievable. She ended up spending all the money on fancy trips and shopping sprees with her friends. When the judge ordered her to pay it back, she fled the country. She now lives in Australia and does not have to pay anything. Story 23. My dad is a divorce attorney. His clients could not decide who would get the Labrador puppies from a new litter they had just bred. The puppies were worth $1,000 each, and the clients were not up to date on their payments. So, my dad brought home a litter of 8 floppy puppies as collateral for us to keep until they could negotiate a settlement. It was so much fun for us kids. Story 24. The most malicious thing I know of personally involved a coworker of mine. He was sleeping with a married woman, and eventually her husband found out she was having an affair. A really ugly divorce followed, during which they fought over many assets. But the biggest point of contention was their dog, a lovely German shepherd named Orion. Eventually, the husband was awarded custody of the dog. In less than a month, he had the dog put down just to hurt her in retaliation for the affair. Edit: when I posted this, I thought this situation was rare and shocking because of its cruelty. After reading the responses in this thread, I am not only saddened by how many pets get caught in the crossfire, but I am genuinely shocked by the lengths some people will go to for petty vengeance. Story 25. A husband and wife divorced after the husband found out she had been texting other men. He fell into a deep depression. They did not have much, just a lot of debt and 2 dogs. One dog had been his from before the marriage, so he kept her. The other was about 3 years old and had been bought to keep the older, 7-year-old dog company while they were at work. The wife insisted that since he was keeping his dog, she would take the other one. He was depressed and just wanted to move on, so he agreed. She took the dog and had it put down the very next day. She did not want the dog, she just wanted to hurt him. Story 26. I do not practice divorce law, but I completed an internship with a family law judge during law school that involved sitting in on many cases. One divorced couple came in because the ex-husband wanted to reduce his spousal support payments due to his lower income, increased financial responsibilities, and the fact that his ex-wife was choosing not to seek paid employment. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. It turned out that while his income had been reduced because of cuts, his new wife, who technically worked as his assistant and had done so before the divorce, was now making quadruple her previous salary. more than he had ever earned. He claimed that his ex-wife had unpaid renters living with her and could support herself if she charged them rent. It turned out they were the couple's shared 18-year-old twins who had just graduated from high school and were living at home until they started college in the fall. It also later came out that he allowed his stepdaughter and her two children to live with him and his new wife rent-free, and he paid for her college. His ex-wife produced evidence showing that he had told his own children to figure out how to pay for college themselves. He claimed that his ex-wife chose to work as a nanny for free and should instead be working somewhere that paid her. The children she cared for without pay were their three shared grandchildren, two of whom were severely disabled. He also claimed that, when he married his new wife, he gained more than 15 new dependents. That was technically true, but those dependents all lived in Mexico and included his new wife's adult siblings and their families, none of whom he had ever met. This guy was shocked when his spousal support was not reduced. Story 27. Not a lawyer, but my partner has a mate who is going through a messy divorce. He registered as a gambling addict and attended Gamblers Anonymous, or whatever it is called. He then went to the casino every day, taking wads of cash with him and pretending to gamble it all away while secretly squirreling the money away. That way, when it came time for the divorce and he was questioned about where all his money had gone, he could prove that he had lost it all because of his gambling addiction and never had to pay her a penny. Story 28. I read about a case where the wife was trying to take half of a guy's business and millions in personal assets, only to find out that the business had been moved into his son's name years earlier. The guy also donated all of their savings worth millions of dollars to a children's hospital in his soon-to-be ex-wife's name so she couldn't get the money. The judge said what he did was technically legal since it was community property and no freeze had been placed on it yet, but it was morally unconscionable. The lawyer said that, in his entire life, he had never seen a bigger smile on a man's face. He just kept saying, "I just wanted to help the children," and smiling. Story 29. Personal experience. Unbeknownst to me, my ex was having an affair. I worked a lot of hours, so I didn't pick up on it. We had always dreamed of buying a house on a huge local lake to retire in. We literally started shopping for houses and even toured about a dozen of them. We found two that were well within our budget, but we needed to sell our house first. My wife convinced me to take out a couple of loans in my name and get a couple of credit cards also in my name. Most of the bills were in her name, and the mortgage was too, so I did. I spent about $25,000 on credit cards and loans to fully update our house and get it ready for the market. As soon as the work was done, she told me she was leaving me and wanted to sell the house. Story 30. Wow, today is my day. Where do I even start? The person who hid $250,000 from a business sale so it wouldn't be included in the equalization payment while providing full disclosure of the actual sale amount. The person who made fake S-work ads for their ex as proof that they were not good parents, without considering that I would want to know why they were browsing S-work ads during their parenting time. The ones who spent thousands of dollars working out the appropriate access, custody, and support terms for their dog, hard to say. Unreasonable people keep my lights on edit? I have to add the one that bothered me the most. It wasn't my case, but I was in court that day for another matter. A local police officer had a family law conference, and coincidentally, a bunch of officers from his force and neighboring forces decided to attend family court that day and stand in the hallway outside the family law courtroom. There were about a dozen officers in full uniform, there to provide support for their fellow officer, I guess. His ex had to walk through a gauntlet of uniformed officers to get to court. This one really bothered me, and it still does. If I had been her lawyer, I would have raised a crap storm over their attempt to intimidate my client and potentially intimidate me as well. Story 31. I am not a lawyer, but I work in the court system. One case that came in involved a couple divorcing on mutual terms. The husband had one child with his wife, and the wife had a child from a previous marriage. He agreed to pay child support for both children. I guess he cared about the other child enough to support them even though it wasn't his obligation. The judge signed the order, and they went to set up the child support account, but it got kicked back because you can't have two child support accounts for the same child. It turned out she had been collecting child support from the biological father the entire time and had never told her husband. She basically tried to collect child support from two fathers for one child, and the other attorney knew about it. Story 32. My dad was physically and verbally abusive to my mom, my siblings, and me. He never essayed us, but he was serially unfaithful to my mom and had a serious drug habit. He left rehab so many times that I don't know why she stayed with him for as long as she did. When I was in 7th grade, he tried to off my mom and she finally filed for divorce. None of his outrageous claims were believed, but I was a knucklehead, just like my dad. Nobody could tell me right from wrong. I was following the example I had, and it wasn't a good one. Mom told me to straighten up or go live with dad, and like a fool, I chose poorly. It was a year of pure hell. His philosophy was, the beatings will continue until morale improves, and he took it literally. He also remarried another drug addict almost immediately. I suspect it was to make my mom jealous, but it backfired. During that year, he beat me, his wife, and even put my stepbrother's face through a glass coffee table when he tried to defend her. I eventually decided I wanted to go back to live with my mom, and it outraged my dad. He completely went off the rails. One morning, he asked me how I felt, and I told him to his face that I wanted to live with Mom because he was an abusive a-hole. Bad idea. He beat me badly. That night, my mom called and asked why we weren't at the courthouse. It turned out he had skipped the court date, claiming he couldn't take time off work because he wanted to keep custody just to make my mom miserable. This happened 2 or 3 more times. Finally, I wised up. The next time he asked me, I told him I had changed my mind and wanted to stay with him. He said, "Hop in the car." We drove to the courthouse. My mom lived about 2 hours away because my dad had moved shortly after getting engaged. Once we were inside the courtroom, the judge asked me which parent I wanted to live with, and I said, my mom. He asked why I had changed my mind from a year earlier, and I described all the abuse I had endured over the previous year, including how my dad intentionally skipped court dates after asking me how I planned to answer. The judge glared at my dad, dismissed me from the courtroom, and told me to wait alone on a bench in the hallway. About 10 minutes later, my dad stormed out, grabbed me by the arm, and dragged me to the car, saying the judge had called me a liar and ruled in his favor. He lied. He took me back to his house and beat me all the way home. Oddly, it wasn't considered kidnapping because the judge hadn't signed the ruling yet, or maybe my mom never pressed charges. Either way, he never went to jail. The following Friday night, my mom came with a deputy to pick me up. His new wife, I refused to call her my stepmom, caught me packing a few belongings and told him. He left work early to try to beat me again and stop me before my mom arrived, but I climbed out my bedroom window onto the roof and told him I would jump off and run to the police station if he tried to stop me. Just as he was yelling at me, the deputy arrived and my mom pulled up behind him. Crisis averted. I was a different teenager after that, not perfect, but far more respectful. I started working at 15 to help pay the bills while I finished high school. I hated my life as a teenager, but it made me into the man I am today. I joined the military a month after graduating from high school and got married 2 years later, promising myself that I would break the cycle of violence and abuse. We celebrated our 25th anniversary in March, and I've never struck my wife or cheated on her. By God's grace, it will stay that way for the rest of my life. Story 33. I just saw this in a YouTube video. The husband gave his wife everything material in the divorce, the house, the cars, and everything else, except for his Magic the Gathering collection. When he went to collect it, he found that his wife had broken the seal on his Magic the Gathering Alpha starter deck. At the time, the sealed deck was worth about $20,000 US. Today, similar sealed decks are listed for around $50,000 on various sites. For context, as soon as you break the seal, the deck loses most of its value. Unless you happen to pull one of the extremely valuable cards such as Black Lotus, you're almost guaranteed to lose a significant amount of money. So she got all of the assets they had accumulated during the marriage, and out of pure spite, destroyed the only valuable thing he received in the divorce. Story 34, not a lawyer. My dad went through some financial troubles. One day he decided he could have more money if he simply stopped paying the mortgage, property taxes, car payments, and other bills. Eventually, he was arrested for tax evasion, and my mom found out and immediately filed for divorce. My mom was a shopaholic and took the news about as well as a toddler being told they couldn't have ice cream. She insisted that my dad didn't make enough money and kept maxing out her American Express card every week. My dad's solution was to stop paying the bills. During the divorce, she said she wanted the nice cars. Great, she could have them. Then she told my dad she wanted the house. My dad begged and pleaded with her not to take it. He told her point blank that the house was only days away from foreclosure. He warned her that she couldn't afford the damage it would do to her credit, but she was determined to stick it to him and thought he was bluffing. After a week of mediation, he finally gave in and said, "Fine, take the house." The house and the mortgage were transferred into her name. The house was eventually foreclosed on, and a lien was placed on it. Through some shady deal, she later sold the house without informing the new owner about the lien, failed to report the sale on her taxes, and spent the money. When the new owner found out, she was in serious trouble. Not to mention if the IRS ever came to collect capital gains taxes, all because she wanted to get back at my dad. Story 35, a friend's ex-wife, and he settled their divorce with her getting the house, a hefty portion of his retirement, all of the gifted jewelry, and even his Harley that she had given him for his birthday. A few weeks later, a robbery occurred, and the only thing stolen was the jewelry he had given her, which had been intended for their daughter. She tried to file an insurance claim but hadn't gotten appraisals or added insurance riders, so the maximum payout was only $1,500 for more than $20,000 worth of jewelry. There was suspicion that she had staged the robbery, but now she was stuck with stolen jewelry that she couldn't legally sell, wear, or give to their daughter without tipping him off to the scam. Story 36. Not my story, but one I read here a couple of years ago. I hope I don't butcher it since it's been a while, but here goes. There was a very wealthy man who was a top executive at a Fortune 500 company going through a nasty divorce. He was set for life, with stock, houses, and assets in many different places. His ex-wife wanted as much as she could get. The husband proposed a deal. If she let him keep everything, he would give her half of his paycheck for the rest of his life. She quickly agreed because his paychecks were enormous and included bonuses worth millions of dollars. As soon as the paperwork was finalized, he quit his job and started working part-time at a sporting goods store. I can't remember which one. the story was told by another employee there, not by the man himself. He still had all of his assets, so he drove a very expensive car to work. One day, a coworker asked how he could afford it. The man said he was set for life and didn't even need to work, but every Friday when he got his paycheck, it made everything worthwhile knowing that his ex-wife would receive only about $150 from each check. Story 37. Not a divorce lawyer, but I had an old neighbor who bought a new car and then went back to the dealership the next day. She told them her husband loved her car so much that he wanted the exact same model with the exact same financing. She immediately hid the second car at her mom's house and then filed for divorce. The affair came to light when police pulled over the second car and found a different man driving it. Story 38. Child of a traumatic divorce here. There are so many, and I mean so many things I could post in this thread about how friggin' terrible my parents were to each other. But this takes the cake. My parents were separated in the process of divorcing and had split custody of my brother and me. We were 5 and 7 at the time. My dad didn't have his own place yet, so when it was his turn to be with us, he came back to our house, the one he purchased, mind you, and my mom was supposed to leave. One weekend, they were arguing over something, and it got so bad that my mom wouldn't leave and told my dad she would call the police, something she apparently did a lot to get her way. After growing up with her, I can attest that she did this a lot unnecessarily to control us. So, she left, called the police, and told them my father was dangerous and had a gun. My dad was in the army, and we had plenty of guns, all locked in a safe, of course. Of course, the police were just doing their job and took my mom at face value. It all happened so fast. My brother and I were watching TV with my dad when the police knocked on the door. My dad opened it and was immediately pepper sprayed without the officers saying anything. Then my dad locked the door, and when the police couldn't bust it down, they went around back, broke our sliding glass door, and arrested my dad in our front yard with all our neighbors watching. I didn't really understand what was happening at the time, but it was traumatizing for sure. Then my mom tried to get full custody of us during the divorce, and thank God the judge ruled for split custody. My whole childhood was honestly crappy because all they did was explain very deep and emotionally complex situations to very young children who just wanted their parents to love each other. But yeah, I've never quite forgiven my mom for that one. Story 39. Not a lawyer, but one of my drinking buddies just went through a nasty divorce. One of the things she used against him was the roughly $15,000 a year he spent at a bar. It sounds bad, but 90% of the time they were both there, he just always paid with his card. Now it makes him look like an alcoholic. Story 40. He owed her $500 as part of the settlement. He brought 2 buckets of unsorted coins, mostly pennies, to our office. She took the light bulbs out of every fixture when she moved out, then refused to give him the right of first refusal if she wanted to get rid of their dog. She spent a year and a half systematically destroying their business, then expected him to pay her hundreds of thousands of dollars for her share of the now worthless business. Story 41. My ex did a good job of convincing me that we were having a nice, cordial, easy divorce until she asked me to sign a couple of quick, easy things. She was in a real hurry and got upset when I said I needed a couple of hours to read through them. It turned out she had gotten someone to sneak in a claim that I was emotionally abusive, which was the opposite of the truth. I ended up getting my own lawyer because of her shady behavior, and mine said she could have essentially taken anything and everything she wanted if I had signed those documents. Story 42. Doubt this'll be seen, but a family friend was the lawyer on a pretty cut-and-dry divorce case. He was representing the husband, and he felt bad for him. There was no bad history between the two, but even straightforward cases can get messy. Apparently, the wife was seriously sharky and was trying to take basically everything. The guy was at the end of his rope. Our family friend was driving behind him on the way to court when he crashed his truck into an SUV. It didn't seem too bad. The SUV flipped onto its side. But he was already helping the other driver out. It happened right in front of the courthouse, so there were plenty of police officers around to help. Then our family friend realized something concerning. The SUV looked a lot like the guy's wife's SUV. Before he could say anything, he saw the police suddenly swarm the guy and pin him to the ground. While everyone watched, thinking the guy was helping, he was repeatedly stabbing his wife with a screwdriver. She unfortunately didn't survive. Pretty sure that was the last divorce case our family friend ever took. Story 43. I articled at a family law firm, but thankfully moved on. The worst case I saw lasted for decades. The husband had been in a motorcycle accident and suffered brain damage. It severely limited his capacity going forward. He received a huge settlement afterward. The wife spent the next several years stealing all of the man's money and property, either by forging his signature or by putting documents in front of him that he couldn't understand and telling him they were something harmless, so he would sign them. She then forged a bunch of letters from the tax authority and convinced him he was about to go to jail. She also convinced him to flee the country. He finally came back several years later to find out everything he owned was in her name, and that one of the documents he had been told to sign was actually divorce papers. The guy was left with nothing. I moved on before I found out how the story ended. Story 44. Not a lawyer, but my parents had a bad divorce. My dad cheated and my mom had a bad drug habit. My parents had a meeting with the judge to set up custody. It was supposed to be around noon, but my dad's lawyer got it moved to the morning on the day of the meeting. and no one told my mom. So my dad showed up, my mom did not, and that meant he got his way. Full custody of my sister and me, plus the power to decide when we could see our mom. When we did see her, it was only for an hour. My mom showed up at the original meeting time, only to be turned away. Story 45. Not a divorce lawyer, but my buddy's wife left him 6 months after the wedding and got engaged to another guy a couple of weeks after leaving. They built a house together, around 3,500 square feet. It was beautiful. She had a hand in designing it, and they moved in right before the wedding. As the divorce was going through, it was decided that she and her new guy would keep the house. We moved his stuff out and threw two back-to-back Project X-type parties, didn't clean up anything, and just left the house sitting for around 10 to 15 days until she moved in. It was the middle of summer, the AC was off, and the windows were shut. It was bad. There was so much damage. I won't go into details. Just use your imagination. It was bad. The ex never officially moved back in because of how bad it was. They sold the house a few months later after a lot of repairs. He did have to pay out quite a bit. I know all the carpets had to be replaced. I knew that after the first party, a lot of drywall had to be repaired, and everything needed to be painted, because we had one guy in there graffitiing the walls, ceiling, and floors. The pool was also ruined because he cracked it with a sledgehammer. He says it was worth every penny just for her to lose her dream house. Story 46. I used to work as a file clerk for a divorce attorney. Our client was trying to get full custody of her child because her husband was dangerously neglectful of their son. How was he being dangerously neglectful? By serving spaghetti instead of turkey for Thanksgiving. I wish I was making this up. Story 47. Not a lawyer, but during his divorce from my mom, he fought for the house. As a result, she and his 4 kids, me included, had to move an hour away to live with our grandmother because it was the only way to afford living. My brother and I were minutes away from our college, but now we had to find on-campus housing, and my little sister had to completely transfer high schools. Meanwhile, his work was an hour away from the house, so living there wasn't even convenient for him. He sold the house months after winning it. Story 48. Not a divorce lawyer, but a child of a divorce. A few months before my parents started their divorce, my mom presented my dad with a life insurance policy out of nowhere. My dad had been suspicious of my mom for a couple of years, but this sent him into full paranoia. He decided to buy a device that recorded phone calls to hear what my mom was saying to her frigging evil sister. It turned out they were coordinating how to have my dad off and make it look like an accident. When my dad told me this, I was so upset that I thought he was lying to me. A few months later, he let me listen to the tape. I still have it to this day in my safe downstairs. You'll never know the feeling of listening to your mom talk about offing your dad with your aunt. As part of their 8-year divorce, they also did some fun things to each other. Mom flooded my dad's house by intentionally breaking the washing machine. Mom stole his work computer and all his accounting files. He ran a business, and it almost put him under because he didn't know who to bill. Dad would sit outside my mom's house and record her mowing the lawn so he could argue that she wasn't too sick to work. Dad simply wouldn't pay her any child support or alimony after the divorce was finalized, which caused her house to be foreclosed on. Those were just a couple of things they did to each other. Stuff like this went on for years. Story 49. Not me, but my cousin is a vet, and her friend went through a divorce. She was friends with both the wife and husband, but the wife was a nasty bitch. Their dog had puppies a month before the divorce, and the husband wanted all the dogs. The wife ended up getting them, and instead of selling the puppies, she brought them to my cousin and said she wanted all 6, I believe. Puppies and the mother put down. My cousin took them and said she would do it, and the wife just left. Little did she know, my cousin had snuck them all out the back door with help from all her coworkers and gave the puppies to the husband. This happened about 4 to 5 years ago, so sorry for the vague details. Story 50, not a lawyer, but I'm the child of divorced parents. My mom got custody of me and my brother and told my dad she would make us hate him. We went from living in a big house to a 3-bedroom apartment and grew up poor. I only saw my dad 3 times a year and talked to him on the phone once a week for an hour. It turns out that was what she had requested in court, but she lied, claiming our dad didn't want to see her talk to us. He paid child support and alimony every month, and she worked full-time. We grew up with no Wi-Fi or cable, no sports or after-school activities, and I never went to summer camp. Apparently, we also didn't have insurance for about 2 years when I was 12. She was hoarding all the money and keeping it in her savings. Around the time of the divorce hearing, she had $12,000 in savings, but the judge didn't see it as a red flag. We hated our dad until we got older and realized he had been trying to provide for us the whole time, even offering to send us to summer camp, which she refused. Despite her keeping all that money and keeping us from him, he still paid for my college, bought my books, and got me a car when mine broke down. I ended up cutting ties with my mom after I found out she called me a whore to defend my brother's behavior. She never reached out, even though she was the parent. Later, I tried contacting her on and off to repair the relationship. She never bought a book for university and refused to let me use her tax information to get a better loan during my last year. In the end, her bitterness backfired. She no longer has a relationship with her daughter, and her son now yells at her and uses her for free rent. Story 51, not a lawyer, but I handled a wild family court case a few years ago. A woman contacted me after her divorce, judgment was finalized. She and her ex had a short marriage, maybe 7 or 8 years. In the divorce, she was awarded 4 years of spousal support at about $400 a month, plus primary custody of their dog. The husband could request time with the dog whenever he wanted, but she promptly moved across the country to be with her family. For several years, the husband never requested time with the dog. He paid his alimony and the two lived peacefully, hating each other like most divorced couples. Fast forward to the final months of his spousal support obligation, he told his ex he would not pay for the last few months because she was dating, claiming her boyfriend meant she no longer needed the money. She told him no and insisted he pay, though she did not care about a few months of support. A few weeks later, he requested visitation with the dog the first time in years. They arranged to meet at an airport where he could take the dog for a few weeks. The day after the exchange, he texted her saying that unless she repaid the roughly $20,000 in spousal support he had paid over the years, she would never see the dog again. She demanded the dog back at the end of his 3-week visit and threatened legal action. He initially backed off. The day before the exchange, he said he could not return the dog because he was in Mexico. When asked when she could expect the dog back, he did not respond. The day after the original exchange date, he claimed he was back in the US and that the dog had run away in Mexico. That was when she brought me in. Now dogs are considered property under the law, so typical remedies are limited to money. However, contempt of court can be used as a pseudo-criminal action. My client insisted, convinced that the husband was hiding the dog. We proceeded with a contempt action. His lawyer treated it as a huge insult and came unprepared for the arraignment. The judge set a trial date. During preparation, I subpoenaed what I could and investigated the husband's story. It looked like this. He claimed he flew with the dog from Atlanta to Los Angeles, then to Mexico. He had no flight certificate for the dog and never contacted a vet. When questioned, he changed the story. He drove the dog to Houston. Then his mother drove it to Cancun while he flew. For reference, Cancun is roughly a 40-hour drive from Texas. In Mexico, he claimed a repairman left a door open and the dog ran away the day before the scheduled exchange. The timeline didn't add up. He called his ex from Los Angeles the day after the exchange to say the dog was gone but had no proof of flights or transfers. It was clear he never intended to return the dog. The "give me $20,000 or you'll never see the dog again" text was admitted into evidence. At trial, he was convicted of contempt of court and sentenced to 5 days in jail. Both the court clerk and the court reporter admitted they had never seen someone so clearly guilty. His objections and requests for continuances were repeatedly overruled. In the end, the wife never got her dog back. The prevailing theory is that he gave it to a friend, but he spent 3 hours in jail, had to pay my fees, and, as a TSA employee, ended up with a criminal record. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Story 52. My mom got divorced. I have a nice boyfriend right now. He treats her well, loves her, and loves all 3 of the kids. During this quarantine, my dad decided that he wasn't comfortable with him being around the kids and told his lawyer that someone her boyfriend is sometimes in our house. Technically, she is breaching part of the agreement, but the timing was horrible. It made these times even harder on my mom. Story 53. I'm not a lawyer, but I work as a legal assistant for a family lawyer. My ex-husband was getting remarried. First, his ex-wife sent him and his new fiancée a dozen black roses before their wedding. Second, his ex-wife had a plane fly overhead during their wedding, dragging a sign that read, "Name of ex-husband likes it up the butt." You can't make this stuff up. The sad part is that she was not well and had been in and out of psychiatric wards over the years. I hope she's getting the help she needs now. Story 54. My mom worked at an animal hospital about 20 years ago while she was studying to become a vet. One day, a guy brought in 2 beautiful chocolate labs and said they needed to be put down. He had won both of them in a divorce and was leaving town, so he wanted to get rid of them to make the move easier. My mom took this hard, and I think it's what made her choose another path in life. Story 55. My mother left my father because of a midlife crisis. At first, she claimed it was to regain her freedom, which made people more sympathetic toward my father. Later, she changed her story and began spreading rumors that he had cheated on her and even essayed her. When I stood up for my father, she claimed I had beaten her over the years as well. You would be surprised how many people would believe a woman who claims to be a victim of domestic violence an essay. It has been 8 years since I lost more than half of my family tree, even on my father's side. People like her are the reason real victims are not taken seriously enough. My dad, on the other hand, is still madly in love with her and says we need to forgive her to move on. I wish I could be half as brave. Story 56. Not an attorney, but my mother's attorney did state that their divorce case was the worst they had ever seen. Not only was my father planning the divorce for years to take my mother's inheritance and hide money and property beforehand, but he also took my college funds and stole all the money saved for my education. I am now left with $50,000 in student debt that I should not have had. He also stole my inheritance from my grandparents, who passed away when I was 17, by removing all the money from the account before I turned 18. It has been 10 years, and there are still unresolved issues with money that he is trying to claim. He is completely obsessed with money. Story 57. A vindictive coworker was going through a divorce and talked about it endlessly. The part that pissed me off was that every time she talked about the possessions they were fighting over, she would refer to them as his tools, his car, or his dog. She knew they were his things but was fighting him for them purely out of spite. I'm sure her lawyer loved it and was happy to cash in. Story 58. I was formerly married and have been divorced for many years now. This is not as evil as some stories, but it still sucked. My ex-wife had the luxury of staying home while I worked upwards of 80 hours per week, which I was okay with. When we separated and began the divorce process, she not only got our house, which I had paid for entirely during the 5 years we owned it, but also the 2 cars, all the furniture, and the electronics. I basically got my clothes. The judge agreed because I had a proven history of working and the ability to make money, whereas she did not. So she required these items. Crappy enough, but wait, there's more. She lost the house quickly and moved in with her wealthy parents. The best part? She gathered all her receipts for hair, nails, tanning restaurants, and more to show all the things I had paid for. The judge granted her an exorbitant amount of alimony for the next few years to continue her expected quality of life. I had to sleep on friends' couches and in cars for months while still working and paying bills. We divorced in 2007 today. She is 40 years old, as huge as a house. She was model type when we met in 2000, and still has never had a job or another long-term relationship. Her parents, whom she still lives with in a 5-bedroom home on the New Jersey shore, are a casino CEO and a vice president of a well-known bank. So yeah, screw her and her work-free millionaire life, complete with a Mercedes-Benz she never earned. Story 59. Not a lawyer, but a child of divorce. My parents owned a couple of duplexes in town as well as our house. They had saved enough to pay off one property in full, and my dad convinced my mom that it was better to pay off one of the duplexes instead of the house. A couple of months later, he filed for divorce and only asked for the paid-off property. He got it, lived on one side, and rented out the other, leaving my mom with 2 kids and 3 mortgages. He refused to pay child support for my sister because she was not his biological daughter. Even though he had legally adopted her, it still makes me feel icky how conniving he was. Story 60. I saw my friend get arrested and brought to jail. He had married someone 20 years his junior, but they were splitting up after about 2 years of marriage. He had just gotten his own apartment and was in the process of moving out and filing for divorce, but he wasn't quick enough. One day they argued. He turned his back on her and she pushed him from behind. He fell and hit her leg, bruising it. She then threatened that if he didn't give her a certain amount of money, she would call the police and claim he had held her by the neck and punched her in the face. He refused. She called the cops and filed a false report. His lawyer advised him to plead out, saying he wasn't sympathetic enough. He's an older man with Asperger's and is very stoic. He still has PTSD from the event almost 20 years later and had never been arrested before. This may not be insane or creative, but it was evil. The destruction a simple push and a lie can cause. Story 61. I am not really a divorce lawyer, but I am currently stuck with a divorce case. Both sides have been at a standstill for at least 4 months now over a difference of less than $1,000. We could have settled in late 2019, but they both just want one last I-1 over the other. It doesn't help that I hate family law cases to begin with. The only winners are the attorneys, and they must go through a lot of booze to cope with the things they deal with. Story 62. My country is in Southern Europe. After graduating from law school, I went to court one day and happened to watch a domestic violence and abuse criminal case trial. The plaintiff was a quiet young woman, perhaps in her mid-30s. The accused was absent, represented by his lawyer, who immediately asked the court for an adjournment. He explained that the accused was a medical doctor currently performing surgery in a large town 2.5 hours away, but wished to testify on another date. The lawyer handed the court an official document from a state hospital confirming the operation. It was already between 10 and 11 o'clock. I considered the adjournment almost certain the 3-judge court rejected the request. The presiding judge seemed stricter than in previous cases. The court started the trial in absentia. The plaintiff testified. She came from the Balkan capital, the daughter of a university professor, and she herself was highly educated with postgraduate studies. She spoke in a soft, fragile voice, looking down or at the presiding judge. He beat her. He locked her in their apartment. He left her without enough food and without money to buy food for herself and their few-month-old baby. He had his parents, brother and sister-in-law, who lived in the same family-owned apartment building, bring her food and check on her. He systematically locked everyone else out of her life. Her friends, her parents, one by one. She was not allowed to work and had no access to a bank account. She felt ashamed and afraid for a long time, becoming increasingly reluctant or unable to call for help or inform her parents. On 1 or 2 occasions, she half-asked her husband's sister-in-law and his parents for help, but they immediately told him instead. One day on a Friday afternoon, he came home. She dared to ask for milk for the baby. He grabbed her and threw her against the wall. He punched her repeatedly. She screamed. The baby cried, and the whole apartment building echoed with the commotion, but no one wanted or dared to help her. He was not an alcoholic or randomly drunk. He locked her inside and left. The next day, Saturday, he beat her again, even more violently. He assaulted her so severely that she suffered extensive bruising and serious injuries. Again, she and the baby screamed, but no one came to help. He left. Her father-in-law visited the house. All he had to say was, "He's gone too far." He brought his wife, the mother of the accused, to check her daughter-in-law's injuries quickly before he came back. I can't remember who eventually got her to the hospital or how she managed to escape, take the baby, and get on a bus to flee to the safety of her family and her original home. I feel awful knowing that this woman experienced this in my country. He found out, and to finally answer the OP's question, what did he do? He immediately went to the police and filed a complaint for parental child abduction. She was stopped at the border by police while holding their baby and carrying only a handful of belongings. It was New Year's Eve, it was freezing and snowing. She had no milk or diapers for the baby and no extra warm clothes. The border police were confused and sympathetic. They brought them into their offices, placed them near a stove, provided diapers and food, and informed the prosecutor. She was released and continued her journey. I listened to all of this and thought, this can't be true, it's all too textbook. The controlling, violent husband, the unprovoked violence, the victim's isolation, the shame, the secondary abuse from the attacker's family and friends. Is this kind of hell real? Then the judge read the medical findings regarding the victim's injuries. Oh, it was real. Apart from the severe injuries to her face and head, the evidence showed the extent of the harm he had caused, and then, miraculously, the doctor showed up. He obviously had not been operating, was not that far away, and looked like a cliché wife-beater from a violent crime movie rather than a respectable doctor. He looked annoyed to be there, while his lawyer looked desperate. He denied everything. He was arrogant, overconfident, and aggressive toward the plaintiff's lawyer and even the presiding judge, though she shut him down every time. He was convicted and received a jail sentence, suspended until the conclusion of any possible appeal. I'm afraid I can't say for certain whether his medical license was suspended. I hope she is safe and happy, far away from him and people like him. Story 63. Not a lawyer, but I was a third party in a divorce. I had been dating the wife, knew the husband, and was an MTF trans. The husband tried to use my presence as a reason to demand sole custody of their daughter. The courts turned it into a psychological evaluation for all three of us. According to the psychologist, I was the only stable influence in their daughter's life. Yeah, they both basically failed the evaluation. My relationship didn't last too long. Story 64. When my parents got divorced and all the financial matters were settled, my mom agreed to take on their existing debt. As the paperwork progressed toward finalizing the divorce, my dad maxed out his credit cards, buying himself new home entertainment equipment and random items, about $12,000 worth. There was nothing my mom could legally do, so she was forced to slowly pay it off over the next 10 years. Story 65. Not a lawyer, but I was a legal intern for a divorce attorney a few years back. The dumbest friggin' divorce I ever sat through lasted over 2 years because they refused to let each other get any ground. I was only there for the last year of the divorce, but they argued over who got the Christmas ornaments for 4 months. Pro tip, if you're ever in a divorce, saying sure, take it is infinitely cheaper than the invoice would be otherwise. Story 66. Not an attorney, but I heard this one from a friend. He was caught in the middle of his parents' divorce. His mom is a teacher in Ontario, Canada, earning about $120,000 per year, while his dad is a general laborer making around $55,000. When they divorced, his dad gave her the house free and clear with the understanding that when she retired, he would receive 55% of her pension to offset his interest in the house. She agreed since he could only receive the money once she retired. A few years later, his mom retired but never informed his dad. The son found out and told her, "Hey, you're retired? You have to start giving dad his money." She responded, "Don't tell your dad, please." Fast forward a few more years, and the son discovered his dad was in financial difficulty because of the economic downturn. He indirectly informed his dad that his mom had been retired for a few years. The dad contacted his attorney. Now the mom was in trouble. She had angered the family court by violating their agreement. In the end, the dad received 65% of her pension for the rest of their lives, and she had to pay him all the money she owed. Story 67. Not a lawyer. But when I went through my divorce, we were still living in the same house for a few months while it was being sold. I spent a weekend at my brother's a couple of hours away to go to a football game and get out of the house. My ex-wife sold off most of the furniture I was planning on taking, a bunch of my power tools, and tried to give the dog away. Luckily, the people never showed up for the dog. That day, I took him to my brother's house for safety. She still tried to get the dog in the divorce, but she was denied. Soulless bish. My pup is my best friend and is still going strong, almost 13 years old. Story 68. I was a family law paralegal, but the worst divorce I ever dealt with was my own. My ex came out as gay and decided he wanted to be a costume designer. Okay, well, bad for me, but more power to him. He decided that the historical collection of paper dolls my grandma had left me should go to him because he wanted to use them as models for his costume designs. My lawyer had to claim the shoebox of paper dolls as non-marital property because they were an inheritance. His lawyer made some sort of legal argument that they had been commingled and were therefore marital property because I had put other things in the box that I had bought during the marriage, such as a coloring book. So, in an otherwise uncontested divorce, there is a giant paragraph in the decree awarding me my non-marital inherited box of paper dolls. Story 69. I was a family law paralegal, but the worst divorce I ever dealt with was my own. My ex came out as gay and decided he wanted to become a costume designer. Okay, well, bad for me, but more power to him. He decided that the historical collection of paper dolls my grandma had left me should go to him because he wanted to use them as models for his costume designs. My lawyer had to claim them, the shoebox of paper dolls, as non-marital property because they were an inheritance. His lawyer made some sort of legal argument that they had been commingled and were therefore marital property because I had put other things in the box that I had bought during the marriage, such as a coloring book. So in an otherwise uncontested divorce, there is a giant paragraph in the decree awarding me my non-marital inherited box of paper dolls. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.